Today we'll be exploring how good is the D-log picture profile on the new Osmo Action 4 versus the most aggressive logarithmic image profile you can get, and that's the S-Log 3 on the Sony A7IV. Oh, so many numbers, but it's gonna be interesting. Why I find this topic so interesting is because the picture quality on the new Action 4 is really good, and with the inclusion of that d-logm gamma curve profile you get a higher dynamic range. But the question is, how much higher, and how does it actually compare to a full-frame camera? So that's what we'll be testing out today. Now, the new Osmo Action 4 features a bigger sensor and less megapixels, which makes it obvious to add that d-logm picture profile because you have a higher dynamic range sensor to start with, and with the addition of 10-bit colors, a log picture profile is very welcome. But before we start analyzing and comparing the difference between the two cameras, we need to talk first about what the log picture profile is and why it's very important to expose it the right way. I'm probably failing right now. So what is a logarithmic image profile? It's... oh my god, ants. Okay, so what is a log image profile and how does the camera compress more data, more dynamic range into the same compressed video file? Well, for this we need to have a crash course at log picture profiles. So the way an image is generated in the camera is through the sensor, and it's through electricity. Now, light hits the sensor and the sensor generates an electric current. So the brighter the light, the more current it's going to have. And the sensor is fragmented into tiny pixels. So the more pixels, the more megapixels you have. So each pixel generates its own electric current. Now, that electric generation is an analog process. So the more light, the more electricity, the smoother the light transition, the smoother the electric current transition. But in a digital world, that's not going to work. So we need to scale everything into small bits and then use that as information data. And this is done with using a transformation function. Okay, so now let's plot a graph. Let's say we have 8 stops of dynamic range, and for each stop you need twice the amount of light. So this is how stops work in photography and videography. So if you want to gain a stop, you need to double the light you have, and then you need to double that to get another stop and double that. So it's a double of double process, and it's not really linear. So the light intensity grows exponentially. But if we plot this on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we plot how much bits of data each of those stops are going to get, we can get a graph that looks like this. You know, there's a chopper saving somebody over there in the mountains. Like every weekend we have hikers that get lost in the mountains, and in Slovenia there is a chopper that can rescue you, and because it's for free, people are tending to use that a lot. And it's not meant to be for free, it's for those who really have trouble, but people go out into the mountains with sneakers and slippers, like literal slippers that you take to the coastline. So for simplicity's sake, let's say that we're working with 8 bits of data, so that's 2 to the power of 8, or in other words 256 bits of data. So for every bit you need to double the amount of information. So 2 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 4, so 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 46 and so on. And if we use a transformation like this, which is called a linear transformation, well, we get an image that looks like this. So a lot of information in the highlights, some in the midtones, and pretty much nothing in the shadows and in the dark places. Now, if you take a close look at the graph, you can see that half of all of the bits, so the 128 bits, are located between stops 7 and 8. So in the highlights, in the really bright areas, and in the shadows and in the dark areas, you only get 2 or 4 bits of data, which means that there's not a lot of things that are going to be recorded in the shadowy areas. So how do we address this? Well, we can use a logarithmic function, which looks something like this. Now here you can see that we're pushing the dark areas into the high bitrate. So the curve is a logarithmic curve, and this is what counteracts that exponential exponential growth of light. And the image looks like this. It's really flat, it's desaturated, because remember, we're not doing this just on the luma curve, we're doing it also in the colors. And this is how we can get more data into the same size compressed video file. Remember, we're working with compressed video files, not raw video. With raw, the transformation is completely different. Now, with all of this said, when you're using log, you have to expose the right way, because as you saw, we're compressing everything into that brighter bandwidth. So typically with log footage, you have to overexpose. Here on the Sony A7IV with S-Log3, I have to overexpose by almost 2 stops to get the most out of the sensor. And on the Osmo Action 4, I'm actually using auto exposure because this does a very good job at exposing for log. Now let's head back to the studio and see how well this does. The quick YouTube teleportation. I mean, I love doing this on YouTube. It's really amazing. So I have here 3 video files. The first one is from the Sony with the S-Log3. The second one is with the DJI Osmo Action 4 with d-logm picture profile. And the third one is the DJI Osmo Action 4, but this time with normal colors. So this is kind of straight out of the camera, color graded, sharpness edit, contrast edit, so everything is here ready to go. Now I do have to mention that I have my sharpness set to -2, as well as the noise reduction on the DJI Osmo Action 4. But that really only plays a role with the normal colors, because with the d-logm picture profile, you don't get much sharpness in anyway, so it's not a sharpened video output, which you can see over here. So d-logm and the normal colors, you can see that there's quite a difference between one and the other. Now if I go to the S-Log3 version, you can see that this one is even softer, so it's even less sharpened than what the DJI Osmo Action 4 with d-logm has. So the full screen, you can see the differences here with all 3 picture profiles. Now these are not color graded, so if I apply a color grade to the first and the second one, so the S-Log3, which becomes this, and the d-logm, which becomes this, and now do the comparison, I can actually see how the look comes out of these 3 image profiles. Now the first video with the S-Log3 picture profile from the Sony looks like this when it's color graded. So you can see that contrast has been added, saturation has been added, you know, everything was transformed using a transform function to come from log to linear back again, and the sharpness has been added. So you can see the difference here without and with. So this is all of the detail that S-Log3 captures, and with my custom color grade, I still retain the detail, I just add the punchiness to the image. Now the same thing can be done with d-logm, and I'm gonna show you the pipeline and the workflow for color grading of both of these in a minute. So this now is the d-logm, so we started from this and we went back here. So if I show you the details in the same section without the color grade, you can see that there's quite a lot of detail here compared to S-Log. This one is, well, it's less contrasty because it's a more aggressive logarithmic picture profile, but this one, you know, this one just looks also nice. And compare this to the ready-to-use file from the camera, the DJI Action 4 with normal colors, you can see that, you know, this really looks over-sharpened, even with the sharpness set to low, so you can see how this actually goes. Now, to be honest, I don't know if the sharpness and noise reduction actually apply to the normal colors as well. They definitely work with the d-log picture profile, but on the other hand, I think that d-log bypasses the sharpening and the noise reduction anyway. So if you guys know this, please let me know down below and share it with the wider audience. So does sharpening and noise reduction apply to both d-log and normal picture profile, or just the normal picture profile? Not really sure, I haven't tested that out, but you can clearly see how much more detail is captured with d-log compared to normal, and d-log compared to S-Log. I mean, clearly the S-Log is a winner, but it's not that big of a difference. Now let's see if I color grade all of this and look at the same patch. You can see that I have nice details here. If I go to d-log, I still have the nice details. They actually look quite similar to what I had before, so S-Log and d-log. And then if I go to the ready-to-use normal picture profile, yeah, now this one's just blown out, and I can show you the same thing here in the highlights as well. Well, it's not that big of a difference in the really bright areas because this was clipping in both of these video recordings, but on the S-Log3, well, you can see how much more detail is captured in the really bright areas. And this is where a full frame camera with S-Log3 or similar picture profiles on other camera systems really shine. It's in the highlights. So much detail is preserved in the highlights that is just ridiculous, as long as you're not clipping. Now, I could have manually exposed the DJI Action 4's d-logm picture profile and retained the highlights, but honestly, I find that action cameras are meant to be used in auto. I'm not saying that this is the best choice, and if you want to use D-Log and you want to be cinematic, well, then you should really do manual exposure, just like I do with the Sony full frame. But you know, it's quite a nice comparison, especially in those midtones, to see how much detail is actually preserved compared to a, well, normal picture profile, which is right over here. So anyway, now I promised that I'm going to show you how I color graded this. So we start first with the S-Log3. If I go into my color grading page in Davinci Resolve. Oh, by the way, I'm doing this in Davinci Resolve in case you guys didn't know. So this is the pipeline that I'm using. If I disable everything, this is the straight out of the camera footage, the S-Log3. Then first what I do is I do a color space transform, which I actually use the built-in Davinci Resolve color transform from the S-Log3 to Rec. 709 standard colors. And then before this, I add an adjustment node where I can adjust the potential overexposure and underexposure, and also I apply the white balance here if it's off. Then I have my contrast, which is like just a basic look, which adds a little more contrast. I just lifted the contrast here, and then saturation to add more colors, and then finally sharpening to bring the sharpness back. So Davinci Resolve's sharpness, which I think is much better than what you get from the camera anyway. Now the next clip is the d-logm. If I disable this, you can see how it looks. I apply a LUT on the second node. Now this is the official LUT from the DJI Osmo Action 4 website. Now you can find the link to the LUT in the description. It's just gonna take you to the official webpage of DJI, so you can use the official LUT to transform d-logm into Rec. 709 standard colors. And before this node, I have an adjustment where I adjust the highlights, the shadows, and just kind of play with the exposure. Then afterwards, I add my sharpening, and then I have 3 more nodes that I've talked about in my other videos, which adds that fake depth of field like you can see here in this example. This is shot on a DJI Osmo Action 4, but you can see that there's a separation between me, which is in focus hopefully, and the background, which is a little bit blurry. Also a motion blur node here, which I'm not using for this example because I want to show the really sharp image. And this would actually mean that it's closer now with motion blur enabled to S-Log3 than it was before, because now I have motion blur, so things are going to be blurry. And I mean, you can hardly notice it anyway. So anyway, that's the pipeline I'm using. And of course, for the last file, which is straight out of the camera, this one is completely unedited, and I can show you how you cannot recover the highlights even though if I bring them down. So if I bring down the highlights, I'm not really getting any detail here. I'm just making everything darker. This is because it's already baked in. The details are gone, the file sizes are smaller, and there's just no more detail to bring back in contrast to the d-logm picture profile. So if you want to get most out of your action camera, the Osmo Action 4, well, use d-logm. So for the conclusion, I have to say that I'm really surprised at how good d-logm looks on the Osmo Action 4 compared to one of the most aggressive picture profiles that you can find on the market, the Sony's S-Log3. And when you compare that d-logm color graded version to the normal picture profile on the Action 4, well, you see the benefit. There's a much higher dynamic range, and you have a little bit more latitude to do some post-production color grading the way you want. And of course, you can also apply that sharpness in post, which is much better than straight out of the camera. So anyway, that's it for me, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hit the like button if you did for the algorithm. Also, if you have any comments or questions, leave that down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.